Hi everybody and welcome to One Autistic Person. So when I started this channel, I had two reasons for doing so. One being advocacy, which is something that I've been doing a lot of recently, especially with what's going on with the current situation in the UK and across the world in relation to equality, and I felt a big need to have to do that. But while doing that, I've still been in the background doing a lot of the other stuff that I started it off for, and that's to theorise and to think about autism differently, and to think about it positively, and to maybe look at it differently to the way it's been looked at previously. And part of that is to look, for me personally, is to look at evolutionarily how it was a positive thing, how to be autistic, to have the traits that we have, how that is positive. And for me, that is a huge part of the question that I've been asking myself right from the beginning of my realization that I was autistic. And what I feel I've done is, for me personally, I feel that this, one, explains a lot of things for me, but two, has allowed me to put a lot of things in my life that have allowed me to see things more positively. It hasn't really changed anything in the way my day-to-day life is or anything like that, but it has allowed me to be able to think about it differently, and for me to have a sort of understanding of where it may have originated from, why evolutionarily this was seen as a positive thing for us to pass down in our hereditary within our genes, because it wouldn't be necessarily now. So I feel like I've come up with a theory that does actually suit everything for my version, for my way that I experience autism specifically. And it came to me because of two different things. So one, I have been looking at autism simulators and how they sort of show you what it's like for a neurotypical person and what it may be like, what an experience may be like for an autistic person. And one of the ones that I watched showed you the same clip done one with walking down a street, one where it was neurotypical, and in that neurotypical experience, light wasn't as full on and a lot of detail, and it wasn't as much looking at detail, but just following the road, which I believe is the way that most neurotypical people walk down the road. Now, it very much was in line with how I experienced the world when it was looking at it from an autistic person's experience. Now, it was an autistic man's experience, and I wonder whether that would be different as well, depending on gender, but also on just in general different people. But sunlight has always been really problematic to me. But seeing them side to side, seeing a potential neurotypical version and then a on-screen version of what I see, but being able to look at them separately, was really interesting for me and made me think a lot around sunlight. Sunlight is really problematic to me. It's extremely difficult for me to be able to deal with it, and from a sensory perspective, sunlight and light in general could be really problematic. And then that got me thinking about a lot of other things. But additionally to that, very recently I've started taking melatonin, because one of the big problems that I have as well is sleeping. My sleep is terribly affected. I've suffered from insomnia all of my life. It's been extremely difficult to deal with, and I started taking melatonin, which can sometimes be prescribed from a psychiatrist to see whether it helps with people who are autistic and who are experiencing insomnia. And it has been life-changing in relation to sleep. Now, I sleep at night and I dream more. They're the two things. So I dream more, and I am processing and being able to deal with the previous day a little bit better from a starting point, but it hasn't changed anything in relation to anything else. I'm still fatigued due to my physical condition, but I am also I'm not tired. I'm not waking up tired. And I know it can be a bit complicated to understand the difference between fatigue and being tired, but fatigue is chronic and tiredness isn't necessarily chronic, and it is and it's a different experience. I don't really want to get into that in this video, but there is a very different experience, and being tired and waking up tired when I do manage to go to sleep, probably because of the fact I wasn't getting to sleep, was really problematic. So I was then thinking about, well, why is it that it potentially, and this has been studied quite a lot at the moment, the link between not necessarily not having the hormone melatonin in your system, but not being able to process it in the same way, is something that is being researched quite a bit at the moment within autism studies. And it is seeming like quite often we either lack it or we struggle processing it. So what I thought going down the rabbit hole that I go down, but I've always thought there has to be, from an evolutionary perspective, evolution had to see it positively to pass down the genes, to pass down the traits that we have for us, because they are so intrinsic to who we are. We can't change them. We can mask them, but we can't change them. It's really made me, I really wanted to try and find a solution to it. And I feel for me, this is a solution, and it does make sense to me. And it has really helped me be able to put things into perspective for me, and for me to be able to cater for my needs a little bit better. Not, like I say, nothing's changed. It's more my thought process towards it has changed. And that is that potentially we could have been the nighttime protectors. So we could have been, so you would have had tribes, and then you would have had people who would have stayed awake at night and looked after the tribe at night. Now, that would mean we would need certain traits to be able to do so. Now, I'm going to go through some of them, but there is much more than this when I've thought about it even further, but I could make a video all day about this because I've been thinking about it quite literally for the last 2 months. So what I'm going to do is go through the sort of main points of it, the ones that really clicked for me pretty much straight away, and then I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts on this. So, first of all, we tend to be quite nocturnal. And this is the same across the board generally with neurodivergent people in general, that being awake at night tends to be more of a thing, whereas people who are neurotypical tend to be the other way. You might have people within that who are going to be more night people and more day people, but it seems to be quite a common thread for people who are neurodivergent, autism being part of that. And for me, I start waking up at about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm at my most awake at sort of 10-11 o'clock at night, and then start getting tired as it gets to sort of 4-5 o'clock in the morning, which would be the exact reverse of how people would need to be in line with the day and night. So we do tend to be quite nocturnal, or a lot of people do seem to be. Another one for me, hugely, as I've already pointed out, is sensitivity to light, often daytime light, and also seeing a lot of detail when there is light and focusing a lot on small details on things. That very common trait for people who are autistic. And for a lot of people, light is a big part of our sensory experience and how we experience the world differently. Our sensory experiences tend to be very much based around light. It seems to be the strongest one, and the one that most of us seem to have an effect with, whether that is that we prefer dimmer light, that we like to have changing lights, but quite often you'll find that is the case, and bright light being problematic for us. We have a higher sensitivity to sound. So hunter-gatherers would need to zone out noise because they would be with a group of people. They would also need to be able to zone out the noise of the trees making noises. They would have to zone out the noise of other animals. They would have to zone into what they needed around them, but have to also zone out the noises. Whereas if we were the Night's Watch, we would need to be seeking sound all the time rather than trying to get rid of it. We wouldn't be looking to zone that noise out. We would be looking to zone in on things that were potentially further away, but that could be problematic. And that kind of falls the same with smell. We would smell things differently. We would have to have different smells, and touch. We would need to be able to feel more around us, because if it's dark, we would need to be able to feel around us and feel whether there were small changes in things more. So that would explain maybe why we have more sensitivity to touch. Also, we probably wouldn't be touched as much by other people because we wouldn't be with people as much, because we would be awake at night, they would be asleep. And temperature, this was a really big one for me. So I have a very narrow temperature tolerance. So between a certain amount of temperature, I can't tell you what it is because it can change at times, but it's very, very narrow. I'll go from being cold to being cold, from being cold to being very hot very quickly, and vice versa. This again would make perfect sense because temperature drops at night would be much more dramatic and much quicker, so we would have to be able to sense quicker that there was a drop in temperature for us to be able to protect ourselves more. So that would fit into it as well. I think there's the pretty obvious one of social interactions. If you are awake at night and the rest of your tribe are asleep, you are not going to need to socially interact with them as much, therefore you wouldn't need to read body language as much. None of those things would be as important. You'd be more important. The things around you would be more important than the social interactions themselves. Coordination, quite a lot of us struggle with coordination. Quite a lot of us have a dual diagnosis, a comorbidity with things like dyspraxia, which affect our coordination quite a bit, but certainly around the coordination around spatial awareness and bigger spaces and understanding how to navigate those spaces. We wouldn't have been going out hunting. We would have been asleep when the hunters were going out, so therefore we wouldn't need to have been so as coordinated in the same way, and therefore what would be seen as positively coordinated for the neurotypical side of things, we might not be as good at that, but we can be more focused on smaller detail, which again, we would need to, but bigger things we would find problematic at times. Our need for sameness, we wouldn't be leaving the camp as much. We would be quite homebound. We would be asleep during the day generally, so therefore we would and our perimeter would be quite small in comparison in general. And we would need to have that sameness for the security, because we would need to know what was happening around us for us to be able to keep the rest of the group safe. And that would also fall into our routine, because that routine thought process, we would have routine parameter checks that would be very specific around a specific parameter of the tribe that we were looking after. And the only time that that a problem happened, everybody would be at risk. We would all be at risk, not just you, not just one person. Everybody would be at risk at that point. And every small noise would require exploration, which again leads into us having that need to hear wider and to be able to seek out hearing, and our sight being much more involved with small detail. But it would also explain our fight or flight response being heightened, because we would be generally on our own or in a much smaller group, and everything that happened would be a threat to everybody. We would have to have a heightened fight or flight response. Everything would need us to either run away and get help if we knew that that's what was needed, and get everybody else there to either come to it or run away from it, or we would have to go and deal with it ourselves and go and fight. So our fight and flight response would need to be heightened. You can see here why I get excited by this thought process, because it all falls into one. It felt like there were a load of cards falling into from all over the place that I've been holding around in different places of my head that all came together. And like I say, since I've sort of had this thought, everything I think about when it comes to autism fits this understanding of it. So for me, this makes perfect sense. There's also the fact that a lot of us lack vitamins. I have found out that I have quite a few different vitamin deficiencies recently, but I certainly lack vitamin D, which is possibly because I don't go out as much as I should do. But this is not the first time I've had a vitamin D deficiency. I've had them multiple times, even when I was out more often than I am now. But also the melatonin deficiency or processing issue that I've already said. That has an overarching effect on our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is what basically means that we follow the sun up and the moon down. So it means that our internal clock is automatically set to wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night. It's the reason why our clocks are kind of set like that, and it's very difficult when you first start night shifts or afternoon shifts, or different shifts that don't fall in line with what your body automatically wants. So therefore, that would make sense. Not having melatonin work in the way that it should do, affecting our circadian rhythm, would mean it would be starting to become awake in the afternoon to the evening, as we had to go on shift to protect everybody, and we would be tired in the morning because that's when we would be going to sleep. So we would be reversed to what neurotypical people would be, to what the group of people in the tribe would need. Our focus on facts rather than the complexity of social interactions, this blew my mind when I thought about it. All we'd need was facts. We just need, from other people, all we'd need is information. What has happened during the day? Have they spotted any tribes that are close by? Is there anything that I need to know for me to be able to do my shift, which is going to be on my own, that I need to know straight away, and I need to remember really clear facts. You wouldn't want anything else muddied, because you're going to have to remember that yourself over the night. Well, often good. I know this is certainly the case for me, and I've touched on this in videos before. Often good in crisis for others, but absolutely terrible when anything goes wrong for ourselves. And we also tend to have a heightened sense of social justice while being more isolated in nature. Now, you think about those two things separately. Often good in a crisis for others, but really bad for ourselves. Well, we'd be panicking for ourselves because that's how we would feel. But we're really good to go and help other people. We would always be, anytime anything happened, we would need to go and help other people to get them to go and help themselves. We would be able to have come up with a plan in that time period, that very small window of opportunity we'd have between noticing a threat and going to go and help the rest of the tribe. We would have been able to come up with a solution. So therefore being good in a crisis for other people, but we wouldn't have really had to deal with our own individual crises because they kind of wouldn't be happening. And then social justice, that makes sense. We'd be looking at after the whole group. Our actual natural existence would be to look after the group, but we'd naturally need to be isolated or feel that we can be quite isolated and be okay with that because we would be isolated yet still caring about the group. Therefore, our empathy would be different to those of the group. We wouldn't need to show it as often. We wouldn't need to show it in the same way because it would be understood that we were an outsider generally, but we would be deeply important to the group. And then, and just generally, the completely different set of social expectations, as I've already said, and we would have a hugely reduced requirement for social interaction, and our social interaction would need to be very quick and very easy to understand because we wouldn't have as much time to be able to build relationships with people. So our relationships would be very, very different with the group. Now, then I kind of looked at it from why it's problematic, and I think autism in its main part, yes, it's difficult for us in our lives in general, because of social expectations, but a lot of our social expectations are built around work, but work is where I have found it so difficult. And I think it comes from the fact that teamwork now is very different. And for me, I found that if I'm in a strategic role where I can come up with strategy and go to the group with it, that's great. That I can work that way. I can come up with the good ideas. I don't get as many problems, and then I'm able to share with the group, and I'm able to go away and come back and keep going away and coming back. But as long as I have that, the working environment has very much changed so that that's not the case anymore, and there are less and less jobs that are sort of isolated, because even jobs like security jobs, they used to be very much people on their own, whereas it's moved towards not being on your own as much. So a lot of the jobs that would have been suited to us don't exist anymore, and certainly don't exist in the same way that they used to. Things like data input jobs aren't the same. There's a lot more input and a lot more expectation of a group of people doing it because there's more data to put in. So all of those jobs that we would have levitated towards and being good at and excelled in, we're now being pushed into doing a lot more things in relation to being involved more with other people. And that goes for the same for like drivers. I think a lot of drivers would possibly fall into the category of being neurodivergent. A lot of people who work on the road, and I think that's because of the type of job it is. I certainly, the people that I know within the driving industry, most of them I would say are, or at least have some traits that would be sort of like more weighted towards you're thinking they possibly could be neurodivergent, but their jobs have changed a lot more, where there's a lot more contact, where there is a lot more expectation to do certain things that are above and beyond that very specific role that they're doing. And I think that's where it's problematic. So like I say, work for me has been the most problematic side. Obviously social interactions are, but I can change that, and I can, in relation to my life, I can control that a lot more, and how those social interactions happen on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just going to end with kind of remembering the fact that we were hunter-gatherers for much, much longer than we have been civilized. It was between 200,000 to 300,000 years of being hunter-gatherers, and the last 10,000 years is really when we have started to become a civilization as we know it today, being farmers, being agriculturalists, sort of working more where the whole group is always working. But for most of that time period, at least for a good 5,000 years of that time, much longer in reality, only really in the last 200 years, maybe even the last 100 years, have we lost the need for as many people to work in more isolated roles. Therefore, it's only really now that we're seeing it being much more problematic for us. So we've got 200 to 300,000 years. Even if we'd only got 10,000 years for it to be taken out of us in relation to evolution, if that is the case, we're not going to weed out 200 to 300,000 years worth of evolution over 10,000 years. And that's as far as we know, it's to 200 to 300,000 years. It may even be longer. So it would make sense as well that this would be a role within society, within our tribes, that would be passed down from person to person. Therefore, from an evolutionary perspective, it would be beneficial to pass down the genes that would make us more likely to be able to carry out this role and it not be detrimental to us. Because if you think about that role, it would be extremely detrimental to somebody who panics more, to somebody who wasn't able to be on their own, for somebody who would struggle with routine as much, that was hyper coordinated and it couldn't deal with having to look for sounds, for instance, or didn't have such a heightened fight or flight response. It wouldn't necessarily be beneficial for them. So it would make sense that our genes would pass it down to the next generations, and that would be understood by our tribes, who would then pass it down further and further and further. So it would become really strong traits over a really long period of time, and those traits are only now, I would say, in reality, over the last 100 to 50 to 100 years, where it's really been that they are no longer needed within job roles that we have as much. And certainly over the last 25 years in the millennium, it really has got to the point where those jobs are no longer really available for us en masse, to the point of where there was enough of them to cover everybody who would fall under that umbrella. So I think that's why it's now come to a point where a lot of us are really, really struggling with this in relation to society in general, because it has changed so much in the last 100 years. And that's the reason why it looks like there's potentially more of us, and more of us need to seek a diagnosis, because society has changed so considerably. And this would be a perfect reason for why it was positive enough for our bodies to have made it such important traits to us, to the point of when most of us identify with this is who we are, this is how we experience the world, this is us. Autism is our brain, it's how we experience the world, it's our eyes, our senses, it's everything. And I feel quite good at the idea that this is the case, because it gives an explanation to it, and it makes me feel very much like I found something that explains why it would have been positive previously, and also I can see why it feels much more problematic now and more of a struggle. Although I love my autistic brain, it is a struggle within society, and I feel like that's the case, and also why we wouldn't necessarily be seen as important anymore, which is awful. It's a horrible thing to think, but it would explain why society has such a big push against us in general. Let me know what you think. It's like kind of a positive negative sort of video, because it is kind of pointing out the fact that it is problematic, but I don't like the fact that it is, and I would not change it for anything. I really would not change my brain for anything, no matter how hard life is. I love the way my brain works, and I'm sure most people feel the same way who are watching this. And if you need that explanation and this works for you, then even if one person feels that way after watching this video, that's fantastic, because it really has changed not my life, but it's changed my thought process of all of this, and it's given me an answer to something, a potential answer. It's not a definite answer, you know, I don't know for certain. It just seems to fit everything in my version of the way things are, the way I experience the world. It would make sense. So as always, if you can comment down below, that'd be brilliant. If you could like, share, and subscribe, all perfect. If not, then don't worry too much about it. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.